Hello friends and family, today topic is the government. Let's begin. The old man's eyes, clouded with age and a hint of sadness, scanned the almost empty bookshelves that had once been a bastion of knowledge. His name was Thomas, a name that carried the weight of 1,000 untold stories and the whispers of a bygone era. His wrinkled hands trembled slightly as he pulled out a dusty, well-worn Bible, its pages yellowed by time and touch. He had always found comfort in its words, a sanctuary amidst the ever-changing world outside. The door to the quaint cottage creaked open, and a young girl, no more than 15, peeked in. "Thomas," she whispered urgently, "they're getting closer." The girl's name was Emily, the last vestige of hope in a world that had turned its back on the very scriptures that had once been its moral compass. Her eyes were wide with fear, the pupils dilated, reflecting the flickering candlelight that danced upon the walls. Thomas nodded solemnly, his gaze never leaving the sacred text in his hands. He knew the time had come. For years, the government had been hunting down those who dared to keep the word of God, fearful of the power that such unity and faith could wield against their regime. The walls had ears, and the air was thick with the stench of betrayal. Even family members were not above suspicion, and the bonds of love had been replaced by a cold, suffocating mistrust. He took a deep, shaky breath and turned to Emily. "We must leave," he said firmly, tucking the Bible into a small satchel. The girl's eyes searched his, seeking reassurance in the storm of uncertainty. He offered her a gentle smile, trying to hide the turmoil brewing within him. "God will guide us." They stepped out into the moonlit night, the chill air biting at their skin as they hurried down the deserted cobblestone streets. The once thriving village was now a ghostly tableau of shuttered windows and locked doors. The only sound that pierced the silence was the distant wail of government sirens, growing louder with each passing second. Emily's heart raced as they approached the edge of the village. The forest, a wall of darkness before them, held both promise and peril. Thomas had mentioned a hidden path, known only to a few, that led to a community of believers who had escaped the regime's clutches. It was their only hope for refuge. The sirens grew louder, their wails a symphony of dread that seemed to resonate in the very marrow of their bones. Thomas gripped her hand tightly, a silent gesture of comfort and resolve. They couldn't risk using their flashlights. The light would give them away to the drones that patrolled the skies above, hunting for signs of life that dared to move under the cloak of night. They stumbled through the dense underbrush, the forest floor a tangled web of roots and shadows. Each snap of a twig or rustle of a leaf sent a jolt of panic through Emily's body. The trees loomed like silent sentinels, their branches reaching out as if to grab them and pull them back into the village's grasp. Thomas paused, his breathing labored. He leaned against a sturdy oak, his hand resting on the rough bark. "The path is here," he murmured, his eyes narrowing as he searched the darkness. "We must be careful." Emily's eyes had adjusted somewhat to the night, and she could just make out the faint outline of a narrow trail, almost invisible amidst the foliage. They pushed onward, the sirens now an ominous backdrop to their desperate flight. The forest floor grew steeper, the incline taxing their legs, but they didn't dare slow down. The government's agents wouldn't rest until they had snuffed out every ember of faith that remained. Thomas stumbled, his foot catching on a protruding root. He fell to one knee, grimacing as he tried to maintain a grip on Emily's hand. She helped him up, her own strength surprising her. "We're almost there," she whispered, trying to convince herself as much as him. They followed the path deeper into the forest, the canopy above filtering the moonlight into a soft, ethereal glow that painted the world in shades of silver. The sirens grew distant, swallowed by the symphony of nocturnal creatures that sang around them. Yet, the fear remained, a constant drumbeat in their chests. Thomas pointed to a clearing ahead, where a small cabin sat, nestled between the trees. It was a sight that brought a spark of hope to Emily's eyes. "This is it," he panted, "our sanctuary." They approached the cabin cautiously, their hearts racing in anticipation. As they grew closer, the door swung open, and a figure emerged, silhouetted by the warm light spilling out from within. "Thomas," the figure called out in a hushed tone. It was Rachel, a friend from the old days, her face a welcome beacon of familiarity in the sea of shadows. Rachel's eyes widened in relief when she saw them. She quickly ushered them inside, sealing the door behind them with a heavy thud that echoed through the quiet night. The cabin was simple, yet cozy, with wooden walls adorned with various handcrafted items that spoke of a community thriving in secrecy. A crackling fire in the hearth cast a warm glow, and the smell of a stew simmering on the stove filled the air, making Emily's stomach growl. "You made it," Rachel said, her voice a mix of relief and urgency. "We've been expecting you." Thomas nodded wearily. "The village is no longer safe. They know we're here," Rachel nodded gravely. "We've had reports of increased surveillance. The government is getting more desperate." The cabin's walls seemed to close in around them as they spoke. The warmth of the fire, a stark contrast to the icy dread that clung to their words. Rachel's eyes searched Thomas's, looking for answers that he didn't have. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas took a moment to compose himself before speaking. "We must prepare for the worst, Rachel. The government won't stop until they've found us all." His voice was a blend of steely resolve and the weariness of a man who had seen too much betrayal. "We will fight for our freedom, for our faith. We will not go quietly into the night." Emily felt a swell of courage rise within her, bolstered by Thomas's unyielding spirit. Rachel nodded in agreement, her eyes steely with determination. "We've been stockpiling supplies and building defenses," she revealed, gesturing to the shadows beyond the firelight where weapons and packs of food were neatly stored. "The path to the cabin is well hidden, but we can't be too careful." The three of them huddled around the table, maps spread out before them. Rachel pointed to various points of interest: escape routes, supply caches, and potential strongholds. Their whispers grew more urgent as they discussed the possibility of an imminent raid. The community of believers had grown in numbers over the years, a silent rebellion against the regime's tyranny. But their very existence was a secret that could not be shared with the untrustworthy. The sirens had stopped, but the quiet was eerie, a prelude to the storm they all knew was coming. Thomas's hand trembled slightly as he traced the map's contours with a calloused finger, his mind racing through the scenarios he'd long ago rehearsed in the solitude of his cottage. Emily felt the weight of the moment, her youthful curiosity giving way to the stark reality of their predicament. "We've got to warn the others," Rachel said, her voice tinged with urgency. "They're expecting us to arrive with news, but not like this." Thomas nodded solemnly, the gravity of their situation weighing heavily upon his shoulders. He turned to Emily, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You stay here, child," he instructed gently. "Rest and eat. You've earned it." Emily looked up at him, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "But what if they come?" she whispered. Thomas squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. "Then you hide, and you wait for our return. Do you understand?" Emily nodded, her eyes never leaving his. The gravity of his words resonated within her, and she felt the burden of responsibility settle over her like a heavy blanket. Rachel handed her a warm bowl of stew, the aroma of the food doing little to soothe her nerves. She took it gratefully, her trembling hands betraying her fear. As they ate in tense silence, the air grew colder, and the wind picked up outside, whispering secrets through the trees. Rachel gathered her coat and a few essential supplies. "We must leave now," she said, her voice a low murmur that barely broke the quiet of the cabin. "The others will be waiting." Thomas nodded, his expression a mask of determination. He handed Emily the satchel with the Bible. "Keep this safe," he said. "It's more than just a book. It's our beacon in the dark." He looked at Rachel. "Ready?" Rachel nodded, her jaw set. They moved swiftly into the night, the crunch of leaves underfoot, the only sound to break the silence. The forest was alive with the whispers of the wind, a cacophony of shadows and moonlit dapples playing on the ground. They knew the path well, their feet moving almost of their own accord, guided by the memory of countless clandestine meetings and shared prayers. As they ventured deeper, the forest grew denser, the trees leaning closer as if to shield them from the prying eyes of the drones that still patrolled the sky. The cabin grew smaller in the distance, a solitary bastion of hope in a world that had forgotten the warmth of faith. Rachel led the way, her movements sure and silent, a testament to the years she had spent navigating the woods under the oppressive regime's watchful gaze. Their destination was a small, secluded clearing where a group of believers had gathered. The clearing was lit by a single, flickering torch, casting eerie shadows that danced and stretched across the faces of those who awaited them. There were families with children clutching worn Bibles, young adults with determination etched into their features, and a few others who bore the scars of previous encounters with the government's enforcers. The moment Thomas and Rachel entered the clearing, the hushed conversation ceased and all eyes fell upon them. The air grew thick with tension as Thomas stepped forward, the torchlight illuminating the lines of age and wisdom etched into his face. He raised his voice, steady and firm. "The village is compromised," he announced. "The government knows of our faith, and they will not rest until they have rooted us out." A murmur of dismay rippled through the gathering, but there were no cries of despair. These people had faced adversity before, and their belief had only grown stronger in the face of oppression. A young man named Daniel, who had once been a leader in the underground church, stepped forward. "We've anticipated this day, Thomas," he said, his jaw tight. "We've been preparing." Thomas handed Daniel a rolled-up piece of parchment, the edges frayed with time. "These are the names of those we suspect of informing the government," he said gravely. "We must be vigilant." The group gathered closer, the torchlight flickering as they studied the names, their expressions a blend of anger and sorrow. Each name represented a friend or neighbor who had chosen fear over faith, who had betrayed their brethren for the promise of safety. Rachel's eyes searched the faces around her, looking for any sign of recognition or guilt. "We must not let this divide us," Thomas said, his voice steady amidst the rising tension. "We are God's children, and we stand together." The group nodded solemnly, the gravity of the situation etched into every furrowed brow. Rachel noticed a young mother clutching her child, the little boy's eyes wide with fear as he peeked over her shoulder. The mother's eyes met hers, a silent plea for reassurance. Rachel offered a small, comforting smile, though her own heart felt as if it were in a vice. "We will not go quietly," Daniel affirmed, his voice carrying a quiet strength that seemed to resonate through the trees. "We have been preparing for this moment for too long. Our faith will not be silenced." The group nodded in solemn agreement, the flickering torchlight casting an orange hue across their determined faces. The air was charged with a mix of fear and resolve, the whispers of their prayers melding with the night's symphony of cricket song and distant howls. Rachel could feel the weight of their collective burden, the knowledge that their very existence was a declaration of rebellion against the regime that sought to erase their beliefs. Emily sat by the fireplace in the cabin, the warmth of the flames doing little to ease the chill that had settled in her bones. The Bible lay open on her lap, the verses a silent testament to the strength and hope that had carried them this far. Her eyes scanned the words, searching for comfort in the ancient texts. Outside, the wind grew more insistent, tugging at the cabin's wooden frame and sending shivers through the glass windows. The crackling fire and the ticking of an old clock were the only sounds to break the silence, a stark contrast to the whispers of fear and urgency that had filled the air only moments before. Emily's eyes fell upon a verse, its words standing out like a beacon in the sea of text. "Be strong and of good courage, do not be afraid, nor be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go," it read. Her trembling hands traced the familiar passages, finding solace in the ancient words that had guided generations through trials and tribulations. The wind grew to a howl, and the cabin's door rattled on its hinges. Emily's heart skipped a beat, her eyes darting to the door, her mind racing with the worst-case scenarios. She knew she had to stay hidden, to keep the beacon safe. With a deep breath, she slid the satchel beneath the floorboards, her trembling fingers feeling for the catch that would secure it. In the stillness that followed, she heard the muffled whispers of Rachel and the others, the urgency in their tones unmistakable. They were planning for a war that had been brewing for years, one that pitted faith against fear. The government had long feared the power of a united people, and in their desperation to maintain control, they had turned the very fabric of their society against itself. Emily clutched the edge of the wooden chair, her knuckles white with the effort of remaining still. The walls of the cabin seemed to close in around her, each creak and groan of the old wood a potential harbinger of doom. Yet she took comfort in the knowledge that she was not alone, that she was part of a legacy that had survived centuries of persecution and hardship. The wind outside grew fiercer, its howling a mournful lament that seemed to carry the echoes of their ancestors' prayers. The candlelight danced erratically, casting macabre shadows that danced upon the cabin walls, telling a silent story of their ancestors' struggles and the price they had paid for their beliefs. Rachel's eyes searched the clearing, finding the young mother she had seen earlier, her child now asleep in her arms. Rachel thought of her own mother, her last memory of her, a distant whisper of love, and the warmth of her embrace before she had been torn away by the cold hands of the regime. It was a memory she had carried with her, a spark that had fueled her own resolve to continue the fight for their faith. The group huddled closer around the makeshift table, the flame of the torch casting a warm glow over the maps and supplies. The whispers grew louder as they discussed strategies, the urgency in their voices a stark reminder of the danger that loomed over them. Rachel felt her heart race, her pulse a drumbeat that echoed the sirens in the distance. The plan was simple, yet fraught with peril. They would spread word to other pockets of believers, warning them of the government's increased surveillance and urging them to converge at a secret location deep within the forest. There, They would fortify their position, train, and prepare for the inevitable confrontation. It was a gamble, but one they had to take. Thank you for your time. God bless.